different centuries, different continents, different rulers who never met each other, never read each other's records, never shared a single idea about how to govern. And yet, again and again, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, the same strategy quietly appears. Not starve the population, not feed it well either, keep it hungry enough. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a pattern documented across wildly different societies that had no contact with each other, and underneath it is a specific, measurable mechanism. The real reason is far stranger than cruelty for its own sake. To understand it, you have to understand what hunger actually does to a mind. In 2013, behavioral economist Sendil Mullainathan and psychologist Eldar Shafir published a body of research that reframed how scarcity works on the brain. Their finding, now widely replicated, when a person doesn't have enough, not enough food, not enough money, not enough of any critical resource, their mind doesn't simply feel stressed about it. Their available cognitive capacity actually narrows. This isn't a metaphor. In their studies, people facing financial scarcity performed measurably worse on cognitive tests, tests of planning, reasoning, impulse control, equivalent to a meaningful drop in functional intelligence. Not because they were less capable, because scarcity itself consumes mental bandwidth, the same limited resource needed for long-term thinking, organizing, and resistance. A hungry mind isn't just uncomfortable, it's occupied. Preoccupied with the immediate problem of not having enough, in a way that crowds out the mental space required to plan further ahead, coordinate with others, or challenge a larger system. This is where the historical pattern gets interesting. You'd expect the most controlling systems in history to starve people outright. Most of them didn't. And the reason makes a strange kind of sense once you see it. A starving population has nothing left to lose. Desperation removes the very thing that made hunger useful as a control mechanism in the first place: caution. People with nothing left to lose stop calculating risk the way people with something to protect do. Outright starvation creates martyrs, uprisings, and breaking points. What appears instead, across history, is something stranger and more stable: managed scarcity. Never quite a crisis, never quite enough. Across ancient and pre-modern societies, grain storage and distribution were frequently controlled directly by those in power, not simply for logistics, but as leverage. Who received grain, how much, and when became a quiet mechanism of obedience. A population dependent on a central authority for its next meal has a very specific, very practical reason to avoid conflict with that authority. A similar pattern reappears centuries later in company town economies, where workers were paid partly in food credit or scrip redeemable only at a company-controlled store. Wages were structured so that workers remained perpetually close to insolvency, never quite starving, never quite secure, always one missed payment away from hunger. The arrangement didn't require violence to enforce obedience. The structure did the work on its own. The same shape appears again in colonial-era trade policy, where food exports frequently continued out of regions experiencing serious shortages, prioritizing distant markets over local subsistence. This pattern surfaces repeatedly across multiple empires, in different centuries, on different continents, not as a single deliberate plot, but as a structural choice that consistently produced the same effect. Populations too occupied with survival to mount sustained resistance. Here's what's worth sitting with. None of these systems needed a shared playbook. They didn't need to communicate with each other or learn from each other's methods. They converged on the same strategy because the underlying mechanism is simple and consistent. A population whose cognitive bandwidth is partially consumed by resource insecurity has measurably less capacity left over to organize against the system, creating that insecurity. It's not that hunger makes people compliant through fear alone. It's that hunger makes long-term planning, coordination, and resistance cognitively more expensive at exactly the moment a population would need those capacities most. Now, think about what this looks like without any deliberate orchestration at all. Modern food deserts, entire neighborhoods with limited access to affordable groceries, produce a version of the same cognitive narrowing with no single person intending it as a control mechanism. Wage stagnation against rising food costs creates the identical bandwidth-consuming uncertainty structurally without requiring any conscious decision-maker behind it. This is the part that makes the pattern stranger than a simple villain story. The mechanism doesn't require intent to keep functioning. Once a structure produces chronic, low-grade resource insecurity for any reason, deliberate or accidental, it tends to produce the same cognitive effect. Populations too occupied with immediate survival to organize, plan, or resist effectively. History didn't need a single mastermind repeating the same idea across thousands of years. It needed one consistent fact about the human mind. Scarcity narrows it, reliably, measurably, regardless of who is experiencing it or why. Every system that discovered this, whether by calculation or by accident, discovered the same lever. Not starvation, not abundance, just enough hunger to keep the mind too occupied to look up.